Welcome to Meet, Act, and Part, a Masonic podcast hosted by Midnight Freemasons Greg Knott, Darren Larners, Todd Creason, and Bill Hostler. The views, opinions and experiences that are expressed by the hosts or guests as individual Freemasons do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant body, or Masonic authority to which the hosts or guests belong. And now on with the show.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Meet, Act, and Part. This is episode 26, Leadership or Management. And I am your host, Greg Knott, along with my co-host.
Hi, I'm Darren Laners.
And we are very privileged to have with us tonight a newly minted Midnight Freemason contributor, Chris Hathaway. So Chris, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, brother, and I'm glad to be here and ready to get started.
You know, we always kind of start out asking everybody a little bit about themselves, and why don't you give us some of your Masonic history and things you've been involved with, and take it from there.
All right, so my Masonic history started off a little interesting. My grandpa had always been a Mason growing up, and when I turned 18, I was in high school and heavily involved in extracurriculars. So I didn't join right away. I left for the Army less than 10 days after graduating high school. So didn't become a Mason then. While I was in the Army, I started doing some research on what exactly the Masons were, what organization was my grandpa in. And I thought I would join in the Army and then come back and kind of surprise them. Well, we got deployed a few months into my term, and when I got there, coincidentally, there was a Prince Hall Lodge out of Washington State on base, and they were having meetings, initiations, and several of my friends joined, and I was going to go in and get my entered apprentice with them. And we got to talking, and they thought it'd be best just to wait and join my grandpa's lodge when I got home. So I was kind of disappointed, but I understood. And so we got back to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I said, okay, I'm going to join the Grand Lodge in North Carolina and then come back and show them I'm a Mason. Well, I emailed probably 3 or 4 different lodges, and this was in 2011. So lodges were a lot farther behind on technology than we are even today. So none of the lodges emailed me back, and I was like, man, this must be like top secret stuff. Like I can't get in. So like I'll wait till I join my grandpa's lodge. So a few years later in 2013, when I got out of the Army, I finally talked to my grandpa about it, and I joined Catlin Lodge. About that time, I was enrolled in Illinois State University, and I was working part-time at State Farm. I didn't really have time for lodge meetings. And my grandpa was like, you need to join the Scottish Rite. I was like, I don't have time to join the Scottish Rite. He's like, too bad. Show up in the spring. I've already paid your dues. That's your birthday present. See you there. So I joined the Scottish Rite. I was able to participate, which I wasn't able to do for Blue Lodge. So that really kept me engaged for 2 to 3 years while I was attending school and working nights. So I was able to get into leadership in the Scottish Rite fairly quickly after I joined. I joined the Rose Croix line, and I've been in the line for, this is year 6, and I'm currently the Most Wise Master in the Scottish Rite.
So I think that's kind of interesting. You volunteered for the Army, but got drafted into the Scottish Rite. That's kind of ironic. And really, it's frankly probably our privilege that those North Carolina lodges didn't respond, because you may not have been as active here in Illinois as you would have been if you had joined down there. I'd say it's a good thing in hindsight. The reason we've asked Chris to kind of come on this episode to talk about leadership or management, he completed an MBA this past year at the University of Illinois, And he and I have the privilege of being alums of the same two institutions, both Illinois State and University of Illinois. And I thought somebody fresh out of one of those programs will have kind of the current views and trainings and academic work in this topic area. But then Chris also has been, at least in my view, very much a leader. And we'll talk a difference between a leader and a manager as we get into this. But I've observed him from, kind of afar, you might say, and watched him grow and seen you take increasingly active roles in Scottish Rite. And I know you're involved in other things as well. And so that's why when Darren and I were talking, we both thought you would be just a great person to have on here for leadership and the management topic. So why don't you, if you can, Chris, talk, about what goes on in an MBA today, and do you talk about leadership and management? And then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So funny story, when I started my MBA at the University of Illinois, I was also elected senior warden into Normal Lodge, and the timing was supposed to work out where I wouldn't start the MBA program for a year later, but I started right away. And my first act as senior warden, I guess, was calling my good friend, worshipful brother Longfellow, and inviting him out to lunch and telling him he would be without a senior warden for that Masonic year, because my grad school would be at night, Monday and Wednesdays, so I wouldn't be able to attend Lodge. But yeah, business school, they go into great detail on what makes a leader and what makes a manager. Oftentimes we think those are interchangeable terms, and they can be looked at as one and the same, but really, to me, they're two separate things. And I mean, if you just look at the root word in leadership and management, leadership is for leaders and management is managers. And to me, leaders, the difference that leaders inspire people where managers dictate. Leaders open pathways where managers typically would try to control things. Leadership's coach, management's more of a top-down approach. And I think some examples when you look at people that are business leaders or the movers and shakers in government or whatever, you always hear them referred to as leaders. You don't say they're great managers, you say they're great leaders. And if you look at it from a sports point of view, especially at the quarterback position in football, the great quarterbacks are always talked about as being great leaders, whereas the mediocre quarterbacks, a great compliment would be they manage the game well because they kind of hand the ball off and step out of the way. And I think in a way that's a difference between management and leadership as well, where managers, they kind of put the pieces in play and kind of step back, where leaders are out front and really inspiring others to make the changes.
I've always been fascinated by military leadership, probably because I like history. When you think of your experience in the military, I mean, certainly you saw leaders, but did you see more leaders or more managers? And maybe contrast that to what you see in the corporate environment, how, of course, there are two different atmospheres, obviously, but if you can't compare a leader in the military to a leader in, corporate America.
Yeah, so leadership in the military is constantly evolving. You often see the drill sergeant barking orders on TV and everyone falling in line, and that's how it is in training, but military leadership often shapes the future corporate leadership. When I was everything was about servant leadership, which is exactly what's being preached out in the corporate environment now. Leaders in the military, they do have to be a lot more authoritative, and they have a lot more control over the daily lives of their people, but the basic concepts of coaching and inspiring are the same. The best leaders in the military didn't have to send out orders to make their soldiers do what they wanted. They would create a plan and a strategy, and they would execute it because they wanted to achieve the results. I would say that the best leaders in both environments are often the same, but in the corporate world, it is a little more gentler. They ask more rather than demand, but the concept of leading from the front and servant leadership are being preached in both environments right now.
Let me ask you both a question. For Blue Lodge, the executive officer, if you will, is the Worshipful Master. And do you see the Worshipful Master's role more as that of a leader or that of a manager?
When I looked at it, I was writing down my notes tonight, and when I look at a Masonic Lodge, I think there's a role for management and a role for leadership, but 90% of our officers need to be leaders, and maybe the 10% would be managers. And I think the treasurer and the secretary are in a great spot to be managers, where they help keep the wheels on, keep the pieces going, whereas the Worshipful Master and the wardens, they really need to be the leaders of the lodge that inspire change and movement. And then you have your secretary that really keeps us in order and manages the business and financials of the lodge.
Greg, what are your thoughts about that?
I think I agree with Chris. The worshipful, especially, at least the guys that I've have come through the chair in the various lodges I'm affiliated with. Some have been leaders, some have been managers, some I've been maybe argue were not maybe very effective at either one of those. The leader part to me, if the master can be a leader, then that means he can also inspire others and encourage others to come along and help share in the work. So much of the time, the master ends up doing 90% of the work, except for maybe the secretary and, the treasurer role we talked about. To make anything happen, it seems like the master doing most of it. And then when that master rotates out, then so much of the continuity is gone. And then I was thinking about that today when we were, when I was throwing those questions together and this is something I'd even throw back to both Darren and Chris. How can we encourage the line? Most lodges are using the progressive line. How can, if you have a very successful master, how can he work with those that are coming behind him to keep that momentum going? Because so oftentimes, you get a master that does do a lot of work and things seem to be clicking along and all of a sudden within a couple years, that master's, rotated out and others have filled the chair, and then the momentum seems to get lost. What are you guys' thoughts on how do you keep that momentum going?
I think it comes down to something that we've touched on in earlier episodes called succession planning. And in a way, it touches on mentorship. So one of the things I'm doing in St. Joe, and Travis, if you're listening, this may be a surprise. I know we've talked about it, but I am going to sit Travis down, make sure that not only does he, is he comfortable with the ritual and opening, 1, 2, 3, all that fun stuff that a worshipful master needs to know, but also the ins and out of managing the lodge. And it's funny, both of you have a different take on the worshipful master position than I have. I found it kind of depends on the lodge, and I would say I'm much more of a manager at St. Joe than I would be at home, or where I think I'm more of a leader. And I think that's due to the psychology of the lodge, if you will. So you have these different egos, these different personalities, and each lodge is different. So especially at St. Joe, I think with Travis coming in, it's going to be his first time in the East. He needs someone to mentor him. If not me, then who? So my goal is to, take him, mentor him. And I think my hope is that he pays it forward, that somewhere down the line where there's a kid who's younger than him or uncomfortable and not really sure what he's supposed to do in his chair, that Travis will, take that opportunity and mentor that person and pay forward what I'm doing. At least that's my hope. So to answer your question, Greg, I think it boils down to mentoring the people behind you and making sure that they're all comfortable with the idea of what they're supposed to do that next year. and we'll discuss this at another point, but I'll just raise it here. I'm not sure that we do a good job of setting those expectations.
Yeah, and I'll say mentorship is absolutely critical to keep the succession of the lodge going. One thing that we're going to try, and what I've always said is, a lot of people think we have a initiation problem. Well, I think if we just kept our past masters in the lodge once they're out of the East, we would raise attendance by 50% or more. So one of the things we're doing is when you leave the East, you'll become the marshal of the lodge, and you'd also act as the lodge education officer that year. So in January, I'll become the marshal. This will be the second year in a row that the lodge is doing that, and I hope it continues. And as long as the master knows that he's no longer the master and kind of sit back and be that mentor to the new master and provide education to the lodge leaders coming up, I think it'll be a successful program. One of the other things that I've seen happen with Masonic leadership is we set guys up for failure. So we tell them that it's going to be easy. They've never had a leadership role, or they haven't been a Mason that long. We put them in a chair and they don't succeed, or in their mind they don't succeed, and they get embarrassed, and then you never see them again. So we really need to be intentional and set expectations, like you were saying, Darren, up front before we offer them the job. We can't just fill people with warm bodies and expect them to stick around for a long time, because we all know Masons are very proud people, and once you burn someone's ego, it's kind of hard to get them back.
Yeah, that's some good observations, Chris. I like that idea of the past master immediately going to the marshal. So many times they'll become the Tyler, and it's kind of like, you're either literally or figuratively placing them outside the room, and, you wonder, well, what good did that do? I like that idea of the marshal and education officer, because they're still there, they're still involved, and you're right about, and I've noticed this at St. Joe, it's so many of our past masters, once they've gone through, they're just gone. And what you lose is that institutional memory and probably some of the continuity things we spoke about earlier, they just walk out the door. And I think part of it is because so many times the master is carrying the load for the lodge that you're burned out by the time your term is up, and you're just like, well, let me take a break. You miss a couple months, then it becomes 6 months, and then a year, and then it's all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's just easier not to go. And I've seen that just so many times, and it's like your most experienced members, they walk out and don't come back. So I think, Chris, you're exactly right on encouraging them to come and not only helping with attendance, but tapping their wisdom and knowledge in the lodge. To Darren, to your point, I agree 100% about the mentoring, and I think you're just going to do Travis a big favor by being that mentor to him. You already are, and I've watched him grow, and and he's coming right along, and I think he'll have a good year as master. But a lot of that'll be to the credit, Darren, that you'll have by working with him. And I think that's exactly what Masonry to me is about. It's that one-to-one relationship of encouraging people as they come along and grow and things like that. You touched on servant leadership, Chris, earlier, and that is to me, one of the most interesting topics in the leadership realm of things. And the way I've always kind of thought about it, it's, others before yourself, but yet, you do the work selflessly, so, unselfishly, and you try to inspire others by doing that. And a servant leader's not doing it to gain attention to themselves, but it's almost like they have a sense of duty, and by performing that sense of duty, hopefully they inspire others to come along. And I'd be curious of what both of your thoughts are on servant leadership.
Yeah, I'm glad we came back to that, because there was a point I wanted to make. One of my favorite lines in the 18th degree in the Scottish Rite, basically it says, when you become a perfect Prince Freemason, you become a leader who also serves. Now, when that ritual was written, servant leadership wasn't a buzzword, wasn't mainstream leadership. So we have a pretty old ritual that's telling us, our Scottish Rite people, that to be a true leader, you need to serve, a leader who also serves. So by saying also serves, that's a new concept when that was written. And I think it's becoming mainstream that leaders know that they're only as good as their team. So to me, a servant leadership asks what the needs are of the team to get the job done. They provide them with what they need, and they kind of step out of the way and let them do their job. Where I see more of a management where they give them the task and they also dictate how that task is going to get done and when it's going to get done. So that's what I think about servant leadership.
Darren, what do you think?
Well, I think that the entire concept of the officers within the Masonic Lodge, basically servant leadership. I mean, if you think about how the lodge is arranged and the roles of each officer has a specific duty, but those duties are for the benefit of the other lodge members. For example, the junior warden, his duty is to superintend the brethren during refreshment and make sure that they don't use the means of refreshment to intemperance or excess. And then obeying the worship master, they call the craftsmen back to labor from refreshment. With that role or with any other role that within the Masonic Lodge, each officer is basically working as a servant of the lodge body and all the members of the lodge. And what I think is really unique about that is that this concept is probably more than 300 years old. I mean, we know it's at least 300 based upon when the first Grand Lodge met in England in 1717. We know that Freemasonry is much older than that. So I think that if we really look closely at it, what we see is that this concept of servant leadership has been around for a very long time, at least within the Masonic Lodge itself.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, Chris, your observation's right. I mean, the term servant leadership, came out of from a gentleman named Greenleaf and has kind of evolved in the last, 40 years, I think, since the late 70s. But I think, Darren, your point is there as well, is that, you go back and look throughout the 300 years, the one consistency we have had that's been passed down is that service to the lodge, to the craft, to your others. And of course, maybe it goes to the whole principle of what we're supposed to be doing is make the old infamous saying, making good men better, but making you better so that you go out into the community and use those skills that you've learned in the lodge and apply them to everyday life, whether that is at your work or civic club you're in or whatever it is, and bringing those things out. In other episodes, we've talked about, professional development and do we do enough and we don't. But I guess let me spin it to this kind of a question. How could we do a better job of preparing those that are coming after us? So we talked about mentoring. Are there any examples or anything either one of you could come up with to implement to how either we develop a Grand Lodge program or maybe it's just one in your own Blue Lodge? What do you think we could do to help maybe raise the bar to prepare the people, to prepare the men as they come through the chairs to maybe eventually be totally prepared for the East? Let me throw it to Chris for his first reaction.
Yeah, so here in Illinois, we actually have a very good, it's called the Handbook for Officer Advancement. You don't see it very much, but it lays out all the duties and obligations of each officer. So I think if we just looked in our own resources and pulled it out and educated folks, we'd save ourselves a lot of time and do a lot of good. one of the things, going back to servant leadership, like Darren was saying, we are the epitome of servant leadership because we don't have any wages to offer our members. If they don't want to come, they don't come. We're not providing them with shelter or with, with wages. So it's an all volunteer gig. So one of the first things they taught us in business school was you're going to be limited at your company with promotions and raises and bonuses. So you have to find ways other than money to motivate people. And really, isn't always the best motivation to get people to act anyway. So the better you are creating new ways to get people to achieve results, the better off you'll be. Since I was fresh out of business school, one of the first things I did for my lodge was to develop a vision and a mission statement. And a mission statement's short-term goal, where the vision statement is what you want to achieve in the future. And my mission statement was to give members Masonic light through personal development, community engagement, and meaningful fellowship. And I wrote that based off the ritual from the senior warden where he's supposed to pay the craft their wages if any be due. Well, we don't have wages, so what are the wages? And like you were saying, Greg, to me, the wages are that personal development, engaging with our community, and really having that good fellowship, that parking lot talk that you guys mentioned in the last meeting. And then once you have those wages in your pocket, the vision of the lodge and my lodge was to be the premier lodge in Central Illinois, where we can inspire our members to be better Masons so that they can become leaders in their home, their communities, and their place of worship. So we equip them in the lodge, send them out in the community to spend their wages and get results as leaders, and come back to lodge and rinse and repeat.
Darren, what do you see how do we strengthen the line? Strengthen those. We talked about Travis as senior warden. What else could we do further down the line in addition to mentoring and things? What kind of ideas do you have?
I think Chris hit on one earlier where he had mentioned that not everyone wants to be in the line. Unfortunately, it seems that due to declining membership at the meetings, that we're often just taking the people that show up and putting them in a chair and kind of proverbially throwing them to the wolves. I think that one of the things that I did this past year was we have a younger member of our lodge, Jacob is his name, and I asked Jacob if he was willing to go to the junior warden's chair, or if he wanted to take another chair and just kind of sit and observe. But you give them a choice. You ask them what they want instead of deciding what they want for them. And as we're talking leadership or management, I think that's more the style of a leader when you pull someone aside or you have a one-on-one conversation with an individual and ask them what they want or what their desire is or how they want to grow themselves. And whereas manager would just say, okay, you're sitting in this chair, I've decided because I'm worshipful master, done. I think we need to be more leaders, and we need to understand what our members want from young to old. And if they want to be an officer, if they don't want to be an officer, that's something that we need to try to understand and support. Not everyone's going to want to be in the officer line, and I unfortunately think that we put a lot of people in the line just because, as Chris mentioned earlier, he said the term warm body. We're throwing warm bodies in chairs. I don't necessarily think that's a way to run a lodge. I think that you have to have, obviously you'll have to have the members to open the lodge. You have to have quorum, but not everyone is going to be comfortable in being an officer or, being in the progressive line. So understanding that and understanding that you need to find people that would be willing to be in the line, if there are those that are not, is key to a lodge's growth and success. One of the issues that we have at St. Joe, and I've mentioned this before and on the podcast and articles that I've written for the Midnight Freemasons, is that we've not had a new member in 2 years. And we're not getting that fresh blood in. We're recycling the members. So I was very lucky to be able to put Jacob, honestly, in the chaplain's seat or another chair and have enough bodies to fill the other chairs to be able to open the lodge, because a lot of lodges I don't think have that luxury. Yeah, it's definitely a balancing act, but I think we need to understand what our members want, and we need to form our individual lodge strategy around that. I think at Chris's lodge, and I don't know Chris, I'm assuming that's normal, but maybe it's one of the lodges in Bloomington you belong to. The vision and mission statements I think are awesome, and I would hope that every lodge would have a similar one. Every lodge should want to be the best lodge in their area. I just think that we also have to take into consideration our members and their wants and desires as well.
Yeah, great points. One of the questions I was throwing out there, I was thinking about, and I threw it on our list, was can you have leadership without management? In other words, let's just say everybody in the room is capable and they all want to be leaders, but is it possible that they can all be leaders and not have the management aspect of things? Chris?
So I think you need someone in the lodge that has management skills, but I don't think you can just have all leaders with no management. There does have to be someone that's reviewing the rules, the bylaws, the tax code, keeping everyone in line. Sometimes leaders, they inspire and they have ideas, but they may not execute the best. And I think that's where you can have management skills come into place that keeps people on time and keeps the resources coming in. So I think the management is the baseline of leadership. So you can't have leadership without management, but you can have a bunch of managers that may not necessarily have any leadership skills in the room.
Yeah, and I think, Darren, your point earlier about, the difference between your role at St. Joe versus Homer, I think part of it is, you've been, because of, we've had a lot of work done on the building and things like that, you've been forced into more of a management role because we needed to work through all of those issues, and we had to get a loan, and you had to get the contractor, et cetera. There were so many operational things that had to be done. And I know, of course, your aspirations and mine as well is to not only grow that lodge, but, have more education and things like that. We've been stuck on the management side of it, on the facilities, getting all those done. And hopefully I see the light at the end of the tunnel, because we've been talking about some other things of how we are going to grow the membership again, that we can get out of that management mode and then go to the leadership mode, which I think will help the growth again. And so so you do need both. And so it's almost, I think, Chris, you've said, if you got all those pieces in place, whether that's the secretary or the treasurer or somebody doing that, that really frees up the master to be the leader and liberates others to really do what a lodge is supposed to do. And that is help men grow to be better Freemasons and then, go on the community things we talked about. And so I think lodges get stuck in these ruts where all they talk about is management issues and don't give the members enough of what they want on the other side of it or a reason to come back. Because, and Darren, we've both been through it. How many times can you talk about a roof where you just say, I don't really need to go to that meeting to talk about it again. And so you run the risk, if that's all you do as a lodge, is management issues, reading the minutes and all the things we talk about or laugh about, it turns out meetings are boring. If you can get beyond those, then you flip the coin and get back to me, the leadership side, and that's where you'll grow again. So, Darren, any reaction to those thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. By necessity, we have at St. Joe I personally have had to take on a management role, not only due to the roof, but also due to the current situation with COVID. I'm basically managing day by day. Are we going to have a meeting? Is it going to be virtual? What's the situation with our membership? We've had we've had a member that, contracted COVID, managing that situation, making sure that they're taken care of. Also making sure the members that have been in quarantine, making sure that they're taken care of. If they need assistance, making sure that we're contacting the Grand Lodge appropriate programs to get them the help that they need. So it's been very much by necessity. I think more of a year where I've had to manage, instead of lead. There's not been a lot of opportunity to do leadership. In the past, my past year at St. Joe's, my second term through the chair, we had more opportunities. So we were able to have a trunk or treat and have members of the community come and donate food items for our local food pantry and, give them candy in return. We had a good time with that. We had a good turnout with that. Just by necessity of situation, it has been I think, year for many of us to manage instead of lead. That being said, we've touched on a previous episode regarding talent development, and I think that kind of also goes hand in hand here with what we're discussing regarding the succession planning and how do we get the rest of the line, or how do we get our members of the line ready for the years ahead? And I think, we've discussed the mentoring portion of it, but we've not really touched on more, I guess, practical training. And Chris did bring up the Officer Advancement Handbook. And as he said, it's a very good resource. It's one of the resources I honestly wish that Grand Lodge would implement more emphasis on for the membership. I know that we have they do Grand Lodge schools where we go over certain ritual, but I honestly think that members would benefit from a Grand Lodge program or school where we discuss the officer's advancement handbook and go over the expectations, go over what job duties you have, if you will, for each particular chair. I think that would be beneficial for the members. I know personally that a lot of it was just kind of the first year through when you're worshipful master. It's learning, it's baptism by fire, if you will. I would personally like to see more of a structured program built around that framework where Grand Lodge, and even if it's at the district level or whatever, the DDGM maybe having a workshop to review these items once a year. I think that'd be beneficial.
And this may be an opportunity for the appendant bodies to really show their support for our Blue Lodges, because I know the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction is really putting a lot of resources into officer training and advancement. And even Shriners International just rolled out a new officer school. So if they can step in and pool their resources together to train the Blue Lodge members and officers, I think it'd be beneficial for both, because you're only getting new members from the Blue Lodges, and without the leadership at that level, then your organization is going to dry up as well. So I hope that we keep promoting the Blue Lodges in our appendant bodies and drive down those leadership schools and thought processes.
And I will say, Darren, I think you've underestimated your leadership that you've shown certainly in the calendar year 2020, because you have managed all those situations, but I actually would easily argue that you've shown tremendous leadership by taking the initiative to manage. I mean, and it kind of goes, sometimes I don't separate leadership from management. I do in terms of what they are, but for me, you have to have effective amounts of both. And sometimes you're changing your hat minute by minute as to which one you're doing. But I think, Darren, in your case, you have shown leadership, good leadership in my view, because we've kept the lodge going. And I mean, you and I have worked at home for almost a year, and we were talking about this at work the other day, how you have to be much more deliberate now on communications. You just don't happen to bump into people in the hallway or the break room or wherever. And the Masonic Lodge really has been the same. We've had to use communication at a much higher level to keep people informed and to keep things on track. And so in my view, Darren, you've done a good job at leadership in addition to management, because without the leadership, the inertia wouldn't have happened and we wouldn't have even accomplished what we have this year. And I think you'll look back when this year's over, say, we really did do a lot. We may not have done where we want to go with some of the membership development things, but you have shown a lot of leadership. Chris, I like your point too about of the appendant bodies. I think they can have a great role in developing our leaders. Because as you said, they only exist if we exist. And as the lights seem to continue to go out on lodges that close or merge, I think most of those do close because they get to such small in numbers and they're really not producing, they're not leading or managing anymore, I would probably argue. And as those lights get turned out, that just exasperates the membership problems all through the Masonic cycle. And I think the lights could stay on in a lot of lodges if the members were coming in and the leadership was developed. But once that doesn't happen, it just doesn't take too long that you don't make quorum, and then all of a sudden you're looking to merge with somebody else. And most mergers don't really produce a stronger lodge necessarily. It's just maybe two weak lodges going together because they probably didn't have leadership either. So I think, Darren, where you talked about the DDGMs and these things, what it made me think about is Masonic education. We mostly think about it esoteric or history or things, but it looks like here's a topic that can plug right in that is needed, arguably probably more than the esoteric things if you had to rank order things in terms of strengthening where Freemasonry is today, is these leadership programs, and I think they would be well received. And I think it's probably an idea we ought to kick around in your area education officer role, but I think there's an awful lot of opportunity there. Let me ask you guys another question. Who are your leaders that you admire? From politics, from business, from community, and why would you pick them? And let me start with Chris. And maybe you have one, maybe you have more than one, but who comes to mind when I bring that question to you?
Yes, when I was looking at this question, a lot of people came to mind, and I'm hesitant to actually put any name on it. With we are today, the way we pick apart people, it's really hard to pick one leader without their faults showing up, and we're all human. So I take a lot of examples from many leaders, and the one thing I look at is, are they honest? Do they help you succeed, or are they trying to fill their own mission? So what are they doing for their team? I look for someone that is passionate and has convictions, someone that's going to be there no matter what to see the mission through. So for me, it's not a particular person, but just a set of ideals that many of our political and business leaders today have. And I try to take what they do well and put it in my toolkit and not really judge them overall as a person, because I know eventually they're going to say something or let me down in one way or another. So I really just try to disassociate the people and just look at the traits.
Interesting. That's a good way to look at it. Darren?
It's a difficult question. I would say probably one of the historical figures that I most look at is Abraham Lincoln. And, yeah, I'm a bit of a homer since I live in Illinois and, it is the land of Lincoln, but I think just, if you study the man's life, you can find so many examples of leadership and management, but a lot of character, a lot of intelligence, a lot of leading by, I would say leading by example. So I definitely think that Lincoln would be up there for me. As to Chris's point, modern day, I also would hesitate to name anyone just because of, just the nature, unfortunately, of where we are in society. As Chris said, a good leader is one that puts his ego aside and leads for the good of the people that, he is leading. And he doesn't look at his personal glory. He has a goal of benefiting those around him with his leadership. And those are the type of leaders I look at throughout history. And I think, that's why Lincoln appeals to me. I think just the ability to hold our Union together during, one of the darkest times in American history speaks volumes to the type of man and leader that he was. So I would definitely say Lincoln, and then any other leader that kind of has those similar traits.
I think you're right about you risk naming somebody from present day, knowing that they're a human and going to be imperfect, and in the social media environment we're in, that they're going to be ripped apart. Yeah, I agree. I think you do pick up parts from this person you like and then that other person you like, and you try to bring those into and apply them into what you're doing. If I had to name one figure I didn't know much about, was Dwight Eisenhower. And I was listening to this talk show late one night, and his granddaughter was on there, Susan Eisenhower, and she had written a book, How Ike Led, the Principles Behind Eisenhower's Biggest Decisions. And so, of course, I knew he was the 5-star general in World War II and led the D-Day invasion and all this, and then later became president. But it was and so I bought the book on Audible and listened to it, but it was so interesting to learn about him throughout his life and the things that shaped his way he made decisions. And, especially it talked about when he was president, and it was funny how really little I knew about him. Of course, we'd won the war, and he was obviously extremely popular with all the World War II generation and all those that had been in the service, so much that both political parties wanted him to run for president. Ends up he ran as a Republican and got elected. But it was funny, he never seemed too really worried about the party label. It's almost like the servant leadership, again, the phrase wasn't coined when he was there, but he was this guy that would see both sides, pull things from that, and he frustrated both sides. And it could be even both sides of his own party. But he was pulling things from these good ideas because he was very much a pragmatist and wanted to get things done. And it was just so interesting to hear how he interacted with so many others and pulled those pieces out, and in his case made them effective policy to run the country. But yet he would have these major detractors on, again, even within his own party. And some of the book you'd sworn it was written about current players in today's environment, but he led, and it was just so interesting to see how he would pick this and pick this and pick this, bring it together, and not be afraid to engage even people that disagreed with him, all with the effort of trying, for his case, it was always about the country. And it was an amazing book, and if anybody'd ever be interested, I would highly recommend it. But he's somebody that, again, I knew little about, but when I've really admired what he, not only what he did, but more or less how he did it. And that's what I think was so intriguing about him. So that's my guy. We're kind of getting to the end here, and I'd like to maybe just have us each give some closing thoughts on, again, our topic of leadership or management. Chris, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so I just want to thank you guys for having me on. The Masonic Lodge has taught me so much, and being a leader and being in these positions, I've gained skills that I can take back to my corporation. I'm not a public speaker by any means. I've been nervous throughout this podcast. But being in the Scottish Rite forced me on stage, forced me to do ritual. So now anytime I speak, I try to put myself into that Scottish Rite role that I'm playing a character to try to ease my fears. And just some closing thoughts that we didn't really get to, but I think a Masonic Lodge, we can help with people skills. We can help having those tough conversations. Like you said with Ike, making concessions and deals to compromise with people of differing opinions. And I did want to throw this on here real quick too. There's something that came up on our Grand Lodge page that asked if you should put Masonic qualifications on your resume, and it was a mixed bag, but I would absolutely say yes if you can defend it. I mean, there's so much we do as leaders, whether it be our balance sheets, presenting budgets, raising funds, using limited resources to achieve results. So we shouldn't undersell our Masonic activity. Granted, I'm not going to say I'm the most wise master and get laughed out of the room, but I will tell them what I'm doing to help further along a important organization in the community. So I would just say don't sell yourself short. Keep after your Masonic goals to build your leadership skills and bring it back to your company or organization and show them what we're about. The reason I became a Mason wasn't because my grandpa was related to me, is because he was the man I wanted to be, and he had the respect of other people and the integrity, and if this organization was good enough for me, so that's why I followed suit. So I will close with that.
Thank you. Darren, what are your closing thoughts?
First of all, I wanted to thank Chris for coming on here. Appreciate you being able to join us tonight, Chris, and very thankful to have you on the Midnight Freemasons. I think you add a unique voice to the blog that we've kind of been missing. So I'm so happy that you accepted to become a regular contributor. That being said, some closing thoughts. Earlier, Greg, when you discussed maybe this leadership skills and those types of things being part of Masonic education, I think that's a valid point. I worry somewhat, however, because we have at the Grand Lodge level, there is, a leadership committee or a membership development committee that seems to fall more on the administrative side of things than the educational side. So also, I don't know if from an educational standpoint, our good friend Todd Creason could talk about it, since he is state education officer for the Grand Lodge of Illinois. Regarding how much budget we would have to even put on a leadership skills workshop. So I don't even know if that's something that we'd be able to fund, but that's probably a conversation for another time. I think that there's a certain delineation of things that isn't well defined, that should be probably better defined between the educators in Illinois, the members of the education committee, and the members of the educational officer line, if you will, versus the other side with the district deputies, the area Grand Masters, and the Grand Lodge line. So I think that those are some things that need clarification so that we can add these needed workshops to our curriculum and get our brethren that knowledge that they so deserve. So that's basically all I had, and thanks, Greg, for the kind words. I appreciate it as always. I don't know that I see myself as doing a good job in leading, but if others see it, then I guess I'm doing something right. So thanks for the kind words.
And so I guess my closing thoughts are, and I brought up this topic of leadership and management just because I think they're so both vitally important into not only the operation of a lodge, but learning things out of both of these skill sets are what you can take outside of that lodge room, and as Chris, you said, and use in your community or in your workplace. There's no other organization like Freemasonry that offers you all of these things in one package. And there's some other great service organizations out there, but I don't think there's any mix of any other thing that can bring your ability to grow as a leader, if that's what you want, and yet still have all those moralistic values that we talk about in the degrees and such. This is an important topic. I hope we'll probably do some more on this again, maybe in 2021. And I love to get some feedback even from our listeners. So if you have any feedback on leadership or management or what your thoughts are, we've got a Facebook page you can find and leave those comments out there. But let me just close with saying, Chris, thank you for joining us. Darren, never underestimate yourself, because you are showing leadership, because you know I'd only tell you the truth. If I didn't believe you weren't, I wouldn't tell you. So I think you're doing more good than you know. So with that, we'll end our podcast, and hope everybody's doing well. Stay safe. And thank you for joining us on this episode of Meet, Act, and Part.
Thank you for listening to Meet, Act, and Part. For more information about our show, visit our website at www.meetactandpart.com. While there, please consider supporting the show by sponsoring us on Patreon. Until we meet again, may we meet